Continuing from the 9th chapter of the 2nd canto, text number 3. This chapter is entitled Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Yarhi vava mahimni sve Varhi vava mahimni sve Parasmin kalamayayo Parasmin kalamayayo Ramitagata samohas Ramitagata samohas Tvakto daste tadobhayam Tvakto dvaste tadobhayam Yarhi vava mahimni sve Parasmin kalamayayo Ramitagata samohas Tyaktvo daste tadobhayam Yarhi vava mahimni sve Parasmin kalamayayo Tyaktvo daste tadobhayam, Ramitagata samohas Tyaktvo daste tadobhayam. Chant please.
Yarhi vava mahimni sve Yarhi vava mahimni sve Parasmin kalamayayo Parasmin kalamayayo Ramitagata sammoha Ramitagata sammoha Tyaktva daste tadobhayam Tyaktva daste tadobhayam Yarhi vava mahimni sve Yarhi vava mahimni sve Parasmin kalamayayo Parasmin kalamayayo Ramitagata sammoha
Ramitagata samohas Tyaktvo daste tadobhayam. Vaishnavis? Yarhi vava mahimni sve Parasmin kalamayayo Ramitagata samohas Tyaktvo daste tadobhayam. Anyone else? Yarhi vava mahimni sve Parasmin kalamayayo Ramitagata samohas Tyaktvo daste tadobhayam. Yarhi at any time Vava certainly Mahimni in the glory Sve of himself Parasmin in the supreme Kala time Mayayo of the material energy Ramita enjoys Gata samoha being freed from the misconception Tyaktva giving up Udaste in fullness. Tada then. Hubayam both. The misconceptions of I and mine. Translation. As soon as a living entity becomes situated in its constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifested as the pure self. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Because of the length of the purport, I was asked just to do about half of it. So I will read the first two paragraphs and stop. The two misconceptions of life, namely I and mine, are verily manifested in two classes of men. In the lower state, the conception of mine is very prominent, and in the higher state, the misconception of I is prominent. In the animal state of life, the misconception of mine is perceivable even in the category of cats and dogs, who fight with one another with the same misconception of mine. In the lower stage of human life, the same misconception is also prominent in the shape of it is my body, it is my house, it is my family, it is my caste, it is my nation, it is my country, and so on. And in the higher stage of speculative knowledge, the same misconception of mine is transformed into I am, or it is all I am, etc. There are many classes of men comprehending the same misconception of I and mine in different colors. But the real significance of I can be realized only when one is situated in the consciousness of I am the eternal servant of the Lord. This is pure consciousness, and the whole Vedic literatures teach us this conception of life. The misconception of I am the Lord, or I am the Supreme, is more dangerous than the misconception of mine. Although there are sometimes directions in the Vedic literatures to think oneself one with the Lord, that does not mean that one becomes identical with the Lord in every respect. Undoubtedly, there is oneness of the living entity with the Lord in many respects, but ultimately the living entity is subordinate to the Lord, and he is constitutionally meant for satisfying the senses of the Lord. The Lord therefore asks the conditioned souls to surrender unto him. Had the living entities not been subordinate to the Supreme Will, why would the living entity be asked to surrender? Had the living being been equal in all respects, then why was he put under the influence of Maya? We have already discussed many times that the material energy is controlled by the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita 9.10 confirms this controlling power of the Lord over the material nature. Can a living entity who claims to be as good as the Supreme Being control the material nature? The foolish I would reply that he will do so in the future. Even accepting that in the future one will be as good a controller of material nature as the Supreme Being, then why is one now under the control of material nature? The Bhagavad Gita says that one can be freed from the control of material nature by surrendering unto the Supreme Lord. But if there is no surrender, then the living entity will never be able to control the material nature. So one must also give up this misconception of I by practicing the way of devotional service, or firmly being situated in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. A poor man without any employment or occupation may undergo so many troubles in life, but if by chance the same man gets a good service under the government, he at once becomes happy. There is no profit in denying the supremacy of the Lord, who is the controller of all energies, but one should be constitutionally situated in one's own glory, namely, to be situated in the pure consciousness of being the eternal servant of the Lord. In his conditional life, the living entity is servant of the illusory Maya, And in his liberated state, he is the pure, unqualified servant of the Lord. To become untinged by the modes of material nature is the qualification for entering into the service of the Lord. As long as one is a servant of mental concoctions, one cannot be completely free from the disease of I and mind. I will stop reading the purport there. Translation once again, please repeat. As soon as a living entity becomes situated in his constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifested as the pure self. Om Gyan Vrindasya Ganamrina Shalakya Chakshurunlidam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Stapinam Yena Bhutale Swayam Upakaramayam Vidati Svavarandikam Vanchikalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubevacha Patidanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So this chapter in Srimad Bhagavatam, which, as I said, it's entitled Answers by Citing the Lord's Versions, Shakti Goswami is beginning to reply to the numerous questions presented to him by his disciple, Maharaj Pariksit, which was the title of the last chapter, Questions by the Emperor. And in that chapter, he begins by asking about Narad Muni, who did he speak to? That's text 1, and next text 2, 3, 4, and 5. Maharaj Pariksit is glorifying the Srimad Bhagavatam, and particularly the process of hearing Bhagavatam from the proper source. And then beginning with text number 7, he asks his first question, which essentially is, how did the pure spirit soul, who was originally with Krishna, come in contact with the material energy? I mean, why do we have this material body if we were situated with Krishna and Krishna consciousness? And then he goes and then he asks a number of questions that are about the universe and about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada mentions in a previous verse that the spiritual master answered all of the questions submitted by the disciple, but not necessarily in the order in which they were presented. He takes what he sees as the essence and presents the most important points first. So in this chapter, there's 2 prior verses. And he replies to that first question, which was the 7th text of the 2nd canto. And he says, O king, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer's seeing his own body working. Many people have had out-of-body experience. I don't know if anybody in this room has, but it's not that uncommon. Many people have it when they are in a life-threatening situation. For example, when they are undergoing surgery in a hospital. Sometimes they will have realization of themselves outside the body, looking down and seeing the surgeons operating on their body. This is not unusual. And this is exactly what Shukadeva is saying, and Shukadeva Goswami is saying in this verse. That relationship between the pure soul and pure consciousness with the material body is just like a dreamer seeing his own body working. I listened to a lecture of Srila Prabhupada on this particular verse in 1972 in the spring, April, May. He was in Tokyo for about 2 weeks. And he spoke on this verse, and he spoke on the first 10 or 12 verses of this chapter over a period of a couple of weeks. And he very clearly said that the living entity did not fall down from the spiritual world. He cannot fall down. And he is referring to the word used by Shukadeva Goswami, Svapna drashtu evanjasa. Svapna means dream, drashtu of the seer, and eva like, and anjasa completely. The relationship is just like a dreamer seeing his own body working. So Prabhupada very clearly said in that lecture that it's not possible for the living entity to be fallen, to fall down from the spiritual world, and that we are in a dreamlike state, simply dreaming, or more accurately it would be a nightmare, that we are experiencing life in this material world. And as soon as we wake up, then where are we? We're in the spiritual world where we never left. And we remember once again our natural constitutional position and the duties related to that. Just like we have a nightmare while we're sleeping at night. We wake up, where are we? Are we, in a nightmare still? No, we're at home in bed, safe, but we had a bad dream. And Prabhupada says that the suffering that we undergo in the nightmare and in material existence, the suffering is real. But the cause of the suffering is not real. And he gives the example of someone dreaming that I'm being chased by a tiger in the jungle, and the tigers are going to jump on me and tear me to pieces and eat me. And the suffering is real that the dreamer is having. He actually suffers from that. But is the cause real? No, there's no tiger, there's no jungle, there's no question of them eating you. It's just a bad dream. So Srila Prabhupada says that this whole material existence is like that. We are simply dreaming that we have fallen from our relationship with Krishna. Because we are in contact with the material nature, we are in a diseased condition of life. And due to that disease, we cannot experience life as it is. Just like somebody in a hospital who is afflicted by a terrible disease, we can't live our normal life. We may not be able to eat the same things. We definitely cannot do our normal activities. Our relationships are interrupted, and therefore our level of enjoyment and our quality of life are negatively afflicted until we, under the directions of the doctor, we follow his prescriptions and take the remedy, and gradually we become cured. And when we become cured and enter our healthy state, we can again leave the hospital and live a normal life. So Shukadeva Goswami is explaining in that verse that there's no relationship between the pure soul and impure consciousness with the material body. It's exactly like dreaming and seeing our own body working. And then he continues in the second verse, The illusion to living entity appears in so many forms offered by the external energy of the Lord. While enjoying in the modes of material nature, the encaged living entity misconceives, thinking in terms of I and mine. And Srila Prabhupada explains that because we are conditioned by the laws of material nature, we have different, according to our consciousness, we are awarded a particular body, and according to the body we receive, we enjoy in a particular level, in a particular manner, with particular senses. And Srila Prabhupada often gives a rather graphic analogy of a hog. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, but pigs are very fond of eating stew. I've been in Vrindavan many times, and I've seen this many times, where they actually will fight over a piece of stool left by another animal or a human in the street. They'll fight over it because they like the taste of it. But for us, this is totally abominable. But for the hog, he thinks this is the highest pleasure. And Prabhupada also gives a graphic example of the hog by saying that the hog will have indiscriminate sex anywhere, anytime. With his mother, with his sister, with his siblings. There's no sense of discrimination. And according to that species of life, the living entity is thinking, I'm really enjoying. But we can understand, no, he's not enjoying. Another analogy is of someone who is a drug addict. Someone who is addicted to, for example, heroin. When he doesn't have his heroin, he's suffering tremendously, and it's a physical thing. But when he injects his body with this narcotic, he thinks that there's nothing higher, there's no pleasure higher. But as sober and intelligent, non-addicted people, we can understand that, no, he's just injecting himself with poison. He's killing himself. But because he has a particular taste to enjoy in a particular fashion, as we all do, therefore he thinks wrongly that this drug is the highest pleasure. So in the same way, according to our desire to enjoy, and what we want to enjoy and how we want to enjoy it, the Supreme Lord is very kind, and he gives us any type of body that we desire, that is ultimately, that can enjoy in that capacity to the highest level. But the animals, the plants, the aquatics, they cannot understand that they're not the body. And most people also cannot understand that they're not the body. But this is the beginning of real human life, and this is the beginning of spiritual life, to understand, Aham Brahmasmi. I am not this body, I am Brahman, I am spirit soul, a tiny particle of God. It's like the hand, the fingers, the toes, they're part of the body, and their function is to serve the body. In exactly the same way, as a tiny particle of God, our function, our constitutional position is to serve the Lord. And in today's verse, Shukadeva Goswami is explaining, as soon as a living entity becomes situated in its constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifest as the pure self. So our constitutional position is as servant of the Lord, not as the supreme enjoyer. Prabhupada said that when the living entity first becomes afflicted by the material conditioning, we want to be the supreme enjoyer. And then when we realize, well, I can't be the supreme enjoyer, then let me become the supreme controller. We try to control everything. We try to control people, we try to control the material energy. And Prabhupada hammers on the material scientists repeatedly that they have the misconception that they can control the material energy, they can control the weather, or the rain, or this and that. Or sometimes they say, well, in the future, we're working on that direction, in the future we'll be able to control this. But Prabhupada explains that at no point in time can we become the supreme controller. So first the desire is to be the supreme enjoyer, then, okay, we're frustrated, okay, let me be the supreme controller. And then when we become frustrated in that attempt, or those attempts, then Prabhupada said that many people, transcendentalists, take to trying to just say, okay, it's all null and void, and let me just merge into Brahman effulgence. And the analogy that Srila Prabhupada gives with that, in the Brahman effulgence, there's no differentiation. And Prabhupada gives the analogy of doing nothing. There's no real enjoyment in the Brahman, because there's no distinctions, there's no differentiations, there's no activities. And Prabhupada said it's like telling somebody, okay, you just sit here, don't do anything, just sit. How long can we do that? A few minutes, an hour, maybe longer, but our natural position is to be active, to engage in a variety of activities. And as the transcendentalist further progresses from the Brahman level of realization, the next stage is Paramatma level of realization, which the Yogis achieve. They see the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they see the Lord situated within their heart, and they mistakenly think that that vision is me, I am that Lord. And they're thwarted in their ability to enjoy, because they're thinking that this is me, when actually it's not. But it's only the devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, who actually enjoy properly. Prabhupada said of 3 classes of men, there's 2 classes who do not suffer. One class is the totally intoxicated materialists, who every time there is the slightest flicker of pain on any type, increases the level of intoxication. Prabhupada said such a person is not suffering, because his consciousness is completely covered by ignorance. The other type is the liberated soul. He knows you are not the body. Whatever happens to the body, it's like, okay, my car got in an accident, but I'm okay, it's my car, got, fender bender. But that's not me. Something happens to the body, I'm not that body, I'm spirit soul, and giving life to the body. So we're not affected by what happens to the body. But only the people in between those two, the aspiring devotee, suffers, because we refrain from intoxications, and we don't have full realization yet of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. So we got one foot in both worlds, so to speak. And so we're afflicted by what happens to us. But Shukadeva Goswami is explaining here in this verse today that's on the board, that when we become situated in our constitutional glory, we begin to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy. I found that interesting. Why he says time, and why he precedes material energy with the concept of time. So I researched that a little bit, and in the Brahma Samhita, which is prayers written by Lord Brahma, after his vision of the spiritual world, the highest level in the spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan and even higher Gokula, he wrote prayers, which we only have the 5th chapter of. All the other chapters of that scripture are not manifest to us. And I believe it's the 7th verse in that 5th chapter. He speaks about how when the Supreme Lord desires to create the material existence, he first calls for his time energy, and the time energy interacts with the material nature, and because of that interaction, then activities take place within the created sphere. So he calls for time first to interact with the material energy. So Shukadeva Goswami is explaining here that when we're situated in our constitutional position, which is ultimate happiness, then we can actually enjoy on the transcendental plane, situated beyond time and material energy. And he at once gives up the two misconceptions of I and mine and becomes fully manifested as the pure self. So Prabhupada elaborates, as we heard in the purport, about the misconception of I and mine. And later on in the 3rd canto of the same scripture, Shukadeva Goswami gives the elaborate information about time. In fact, I think it's the 11th chapter. I forget what it's entitled. And it's all about time in the material world. And then later on, in the next chapter, chapter 12, Lord Brahma is speaking about the process of creation. And there's a very nice verse which I have here in my notes. 3:12:2 for those so inclined. Brahma is speaking about his activities prior to creating any of the different species of life. We may or may not know that there's 8,400,000 different species of life. And Shukadeva Goswami is explaining, he says, Brahma first created the nescient engagements like self-deception, the sense of death, anger after frustration, the sense of false ownership, and the illusory bodily conception or forgetfulness of one's real identity. It's interesting that, why would he create these 5 different types of nescience? The very first thing, before he created any species of life. And Prabhupada explains in the purport, he says, before the factual creation of the living entities in different varieties of species, the conditions under which a living being in the material world has to live were created by Brahma. So he created the conditions first, and before he created the different species. Just like if you, in a laboratory setting, suppose you're a biologist and you want to culture a particular type of bacteria. Before you can do that, you have to create the environment in which those bacteria can survive and thrive. Certain levels of humidity, certain temperature ranges, certain things that they can eat, and so on and so forth. But the parameters are established first. Otherwise, there's no possibility of the bacteria actually surviving. So in exactly the same way, Lord Brahma created these nescent activities. And Prabhupada explains that one of them is the misconception of I and mine. I am this body, and anything in relation to this body is mine. My wife, my children, my house, my car, my bank balance, my job, my place of employment, my country, my society, my nation, like that. And Prabhupada explained that these are all misconceptions. We have nothing to do with them. Nothing to do with them. They pertain only to to the body. But because we're not the body, we are spirit soul. When we're actually in pure consciousness, acting on that level, then these have no effect on us, and they have no meaning to us, really. So as soon as a living entity becomes situated in its constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifest as the pure self. So I've been informed that I'm speaking over time, so I will stop here. Anybody has any questions, comments, we can discuss any points here. Now's the time. We have a microphone? Shall we run?
Just think, as
Wait, hold on.
teacher, as teaching young ones, you can see that the I and mind is already manifest from a very, very young age. In the beginning, it's my toy, and they really do get upset if someone else wants to kind of explore, what that article can do or that, toy can do. So possessiveness, starts at such a young age.
It actually continues from a previous life.
Yeah.
It's not that we didn't have it when we were born. No, we had it when we were born. But it would not manifest just simply because the baby can do hardly anything. Can't express himself except for cry and maybe giggle. Yeah, we bring it with us from our previous lifetimes.
Yeah. So sometimes, when I usually hear a child, even through the school system, going up, they say my, like my pencil, I correct by saying the pencil, or trying to help them to understand, just in very medial, things throughout the day.
Thank you.
Something else I wanted to say.
Well, when you remember, I found it interesting, it's very appropriate to society today. Srila Prabhupada speaks on this misconception of I and mine, and he even says, my country, in the purport. My nation, my country, my family, this and that. And there is, according to some, there is a crisis on our southern border. There's so many people coming illegally into the country. But Prabhupada, here in this purport, you can say condemns that type of mentality. But does that mean that he supports open borders?
Closer to the mic.
Does that mean that Prabhupada supports open borders? No. Prabhupada presents the Vedic conclusion. And the social system, the perfect social system, some of you might find this quite amazing, is spiritual communism. Now, what's the basic principle of communism? That the state owns and controls everything. But then, in practice, well, the state is simply people, and we see that in countries that have communist governments, the people that are in positions of controlling the government are secretly amassing things for themselves. They're not living like, no, it's everything for everybody. So Prabhupada explains that in the Ishopanishad, it is stated that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the owner and controller of everything. Because he creates everything, therefore he is the owner. If you build a house, generally, and there are the people who do it for a living, contractors, but generally if you build a house, you are the owner of the house. You create a child, you are the owner, so to speak, of that child. You have responsibilities. So Prabhupada says that the ideal form of governments is spiritual communism, where we understand that everything belongs to God. Prabhu said in the purport, I don't think we read it, that, before the Europeans came here in the late 1500s, early 1500s, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, early 1500s, there were people living here. People were not known by the Europeans who came, and we all know some of the history, but the point is that it's not like this tract of land that we call America was discovered. It was discovered by foreigners, but there was millions of people who were living here already. And they had communities, societies, social structures, and before them, we have no idea. But the point is that the land existed even before the creation by Lord Brahma of the living entities. And therefore, it is because it was created by the Supreme Lord, it's His. And it's communism in the sense that we all are entitled to the property of the Father. All the children of the Father are entitled to the property of the Father. And the Father makes sure that He loves all the children. Any of the parents in here, and even not, you can understand, that parents love their children. Some may be more talented, some may be less talented, but we love them all. And we want to see that they all have the best that they can have in their life. So in exactly the same way, God is the Supreme Father, and every living entity in every species of life are His children. It's not that just human beings are the children of God. The animals, the plants, the trees, the aquatics, we're all children of God. And we're all entitled to take nourishment and our sustenance and maintenance from the facilities offered by the Lord. And in this purport that I was referring to, 3.12.2, Prabhupada explains there that all the facilities of the material energy are made available for anybody and everybody who is trying to be on the transcendental platform. In other words, if we're trying to understand what is a relationship with God, anything and everything within this material world is available to us for that purpose. But those who are not, we're simply trying to enjoy the facilities of the material energy, and the conception of I and mine becomes infected with greed, and we just try to gather more and more. I want a monopoly. I want to control all of this particular thing. That is the goal of every person in business, to have a monopoly. And one of the rules of every government is there can be no monopolies. Anyhow, spiritual communism is the proper social structure, not social structure, but a form of governance. And we are each entitled to enjoy the bounty that is provided by the Supreme Lord according to our needs. I don't know how we're going to hop on that.
So what would be, maybe you can kind of summarize, I heard that's what you were saying now.
I couldn't understand you.
So we are not, if we are not, Krishna is the owner, right? And it's not mine, but at the same time I do have in my possession those things. And of course I know everything is, I'm not going to take anything with me when I die. So that's obvious. So I'm not sure when you said the spiritual communism. So what's the mentality? So it's not that devotees do not own things, right? Even though they understand Krishna is.
We are given responsibility and responsibilities, plural. We have many responsibilities. And one aspect of that principal responsibility is stewardship. We understand that we're a steward This land existed before I was born. It will exist after I die. But certain things we have responsibility for, and certain things are given to us for our control, so to speak. But it's not a question of controlling, but we're responsible for making sure that things are utilized properly.
And one level it is also controlling as well, because we do manage our...
Yes, but we're controlling in the sense that we are properly utilizing. We're not controlling in the sense that we are the creator, we're the maintainer, or we're the destroyer. We didn't create this. And Prabhu says, this land was here before the Europeans came. We may manipulate the material energy. Just like, for example, we built a house. We took, lumber and cement and brick and block and so many different things. And we manipulated the material energy and we created a house. But that will, disintegrate and fall apart later rather than sooner, hopefully. But the point is that, we did not create the elements. We may have manipulated the energy, but we are not the controller of the energy. That is God.
But we have a minute ability to control. We do control in the sense, you build the house. You are in charge.
I was allowed to do that. It's not that...
I'm not saying you in general, I'm saying in general.
Okay.
So there's a minute control
yes.
that we have over things and over our life. We know ultimately Krishna is...
The key word there is minute. Right. It's very limited.
So we need to acknowledge that we have it.
Yes.
We are in charge of things, whatever we have. But we need to understand that it's limited.
Very limited, and ultimately the Supreme Lord is the Supreme Controller. Yogis?
Thank you for this class. I just remembered one situation when I was doing Bhakti Shakti with Mother Urmila. She had these different tricky questions for us. And one of them was for book Ishupanishad, because this is the verse, right? Ishurasiddham Sarvam, that everything belongs to Krishna. Her question was, okay, everything belongs to Krishna, then does it mean that I can take somebody else's soul? Somebody else's soap, like a lovely soap or something like that. So I like this point about Krishna gives us responsibility.
Yeah.
Maybe my question is where is this line where, for example, Mother Shilagama mentioned about the kids, right? That, she would say that, it just depends, right? It's not yours or something like that. But then by giving responsibility, by saying that, okay, this is mine, I'm taking responsibility. So where is this line?
That's a very good question. The line is always moving. It's in a constant state of flux. Whatever things come to us by the grace of God, then when they come to us, then we have the sense of responsibility. And when they're taken away from us, and everything, as Madhuri says, everything is ultimately taken away from us at the time of death, then we're no longer responsible. And we have a perfect example here in the Bhagavatam that the Emperor Maharaj Pariksit, he knew he was going to die in 7 days. So he didn't wait to renounce everything until the time of death. He got up and he walked out of his kingdom, left behind his royal dress, his loving family and relations, his royal treasury, everything he walked away from. And some people say that life begins after we realize that I'm going to die at one point in time. Prabhu says it's not a question of if, but just when. We're going to die today or tomorrow. So a highly intelligent person acts on that and just, severs all attachments. Now, to everything connected to the body. Now, that doesn't mean that he severs the responsibility. A husband still has to take care of the family, still has to provide for the family, like that. But we do it in a detached manner. Whatever happens, It happens. I'm acting according to the best of my ability, but I'm not attached to what the results are. And some people say that we don't actually live until we attain that platform of consciousness and activities. Because prior to that, we're living in a state of fear. Fear and possessiveness. I am mine, when can I get more, when will it be taken away? Like that. It's not actually living. Interesting concept. Can you please take the mask off so I can understand? Thank you.
My follow-up question to that is, how can one develop that level of detachment, knowing that we have some level of responsibility and control under our shelter? At the same time, how can we develop that sort of a detachment?
Excellent question. How can we develop that sort of attachment, knowing that we have different responsibilities? That is explained earlier in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the verse is simply by studying the Srimad Bhagavatam, automatically detachment occurs within the heart and within the mind. And attachment develops for the Supreme Personality of God. So we become detached from all of our material attachments, and that attachment is diverted properly towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as devotees, we know I have responsibilities. Actually, a devotee is more responsible than a non-devotee, because we understand this is Krishna's, this is Krishna's, this is Krishna's. It's his energy. It's given to me to utilize. It's under my stewardship, my limited control, but actually belongs to Krishna. I have my job by the grace of the Lord. And by having that job, I'm able to get an income by which I can maintain and develop my family. So we're actually more responsible than non-devotees. But the short answer and really perfect answer to your question is by hearing regularly Srimad Bhagavatam. That's why we encourage everybody, all of our guests, to bring a set of Bhagavatams home with you and read them daily, even if it's just one verse, even just 5-10 minutes. But by that constant daily hearing, it's just like, it's automatic. Our material attachments, or our attachments for material things, will just diminish. Just like when the sun comes up, the fog gradually dissipates. You can't really see it happening, but it's at one point in time, it's gone. So in exactly the same way, by regularly hearing from the Bhagavatam, all of our material attachments are just dissolved. It's really a far-out process.
Why is it so difficult, Prabhu?
Why is it so difficult? Because we're so attached
To what?
to whatever it is that's difficult. Well, I want to have something really bad. I want to, whatever it is, I want a new car.
No, let's say if I'm saying that, let's say if I'm saying, Krishna, I really want to be your servant. I really want to serve you. And I don't want to deal with these materialistic problems also at the same time. What is the difficulty when I am under those situations, my consciousness is disturbed?
The difficulty is we're not patient. Just like, suppose there's a fan plugged into the wall behind me, okay? Plug in, it's running. You pull the plug out. What happens to the fan? Does it keep going, or does it immediately stop? It keeps going. Why? Because there's momentum. So when we unplug from material activities and turn our life to service of the Lord, our material attachments do not immediately automatically stop. But if we continue to leave the plug disconnected from the wall, it's guaranteed that the fan will stop. So if we continue to utilize all of our energy in serving and pleasing the Lord and His devotees, it's guaranteed that these material attachments will gradually stop. It's an interesting analogy.
Very nice class, Prabhu. It's very-
Now you have to hold the mic like this and you make sure it's on.
Very nice class and so many good points and so many things.
Yeah, thank you.
Things learned. So, just follow-up question from Mataji. Is it the right understanding that maybe Krishna is actually testing us if we are really detached or not? That's why it goes on for some time to develop our detachment or attachment to Krishna. Is it right understanding?
Yes, that is also there. From time to time he will test us. But generally it's simply that we have attachments from millions, billions of lifetimes. And as Shalaram and I were discussing that, even children, babies, they have likes, dislikes, inclinations, they're disinclined to certain things, but it's just not able to express, and they're not manifest until they reach a certain age. And then these things become apparent. Apparent means obvious. And there's a debate that's been ongoing for decades, with nurture versus nature. Does a child develop its personality according to nature or according to how it's raised by the parents, how it's nurtured? But both are there. We have our desires in our heart that we carry with us, just like the air carries aromas. Sometimes you'll smell something, oh, what was that? And sometimes, wow, that's really nice. But the air is just simply carrying it. So in the same way, our mind is attached to certain ways and methods of enjoying. And we carry those conceptions from life to life. And the Lord is in your heart. He's in the heart of every living entity. And He's very kind. And He's very loving and giving when He sees, oh, you want to enjoy in a particular fashion. Okay, no problem. And He gives you that ability and facility. To the extent that we deserve, not necessarily to the extent that we may desire, but to the extent that we deserve. He's given. That makes sense? Hare Krishna. Okay, we are way over time. Thank you very much for your participation and attention. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.